Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you who don't yet know me, my name is Alex Tullio. I'm the CEO of Financial Executive Women, and 3 days a week, we bring you awesome and very interesting and thought-provoking conversations with leaders from all walks of life. So very happy to be here with you on Wednesday, and we started doing this, 8 months ago or something like that, and it's taken on a life of its own. So happy that you can be joining us today. And of course, so many of you watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and of course our very own platform, which is super exciting for us. So as always, we've got some announcements to come up, and I am really pumped today to actually announce our next corporate partner, which is really thrilling to be able to announce. That is AIA. We've been working with the team at AIA for some months now, and really super excited. Like I've said before, these partnerships, they're genuine collaborations, and the ability to work with some really incredible leaders from lots of different corporations is super exciting to us. So welcome everyone, AIA, and so glad that you have joined the Few family, and we certainly look forward to working with you both here and in New Zealand. So shout out to our NZ members as well. And of course, to all our lovely corporate partners, I always say thank you, and for good reason. We wouldn't be here without you. And it's just so great to be doing so many different and creative things, all in the name of addressing gender equality and diversity in the workplace. So very excited to be here with you all. Now, as always, we've got so much coming up. For those of you who are new, we do come to you Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. You will find that some days I ask myself what day it is, because we are still streaming from my home office, though we were just chatting about Melbourne. We've just got our key to freedom this week, so I don't think we know what to do with it yet, but it's great to be here as always. Today, I'm really looking forward to chatting with Martine, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. And then Thursday. So for those of you who've tuned in before, you know that Thursdays, we're actually doing a bit of a special series for probably about 3 to 6 months around digital transformation. And the reason that came about was that the feedback from our community is very much, a lot of curiosity around what does it mean to digitally transform. I think if anything else, the pandemic has really shone a spotlight on the use of technology. But as we all know, as leaders of businesses, it's not that simple. We've got to take into account the human impact, culture, legacy systems, customers, all sorts of things to really effectively digitally transform our business. So on Thursdays, Mick Philippou and I, we co-host together, and we chat to some amazing and very interesting leaders with a lens on digital transformation. So that's Thursday. And then next Wednesday, because Tuesday is Melbourne Cup Day, if you can believe it, in Melbourne. That was a bit of a shock when I realised that. So on Wednesday next week, we have Marianne Lambertang. Now, Marianne is from Stone and Chalk, and so we're going to be talking about, well, a whole heap of things with Marianne. Her transition from big corporate, like I was, to a more entrepreneurial space. She's working with startups, fintechs, what it takes to succeed in that, and all sorts of different things around her leadership journey as well. So that's going to be super interesting as well. And then, of course, this Friday, you know that we bring you regular masterclasses. So as we always say, you know where to reach us. So please do give us feedback on what you want to go deeper on, who you want to hear from. You may have actually had the privilege and pleasure of being in a masterclass and hearing Sal Wilson before. So back by popular demand, Sally is going to be back with us on Friday, talking all about how do you actually cope with major change? What if happens when you have change thrust upon you? And it's all about resilience and how we show up as ourselves and really thrive in these times. And I think given what's been happening now more than ever, this is incredibly relevant and important. So if you haven't yet registered for Sal's Masterclass, you just need to go to our platform. And Jada, I know you're going to put the link in the chat if you haven't already. And that's where you can go to our platform and you can register for all our events there as well. So we look forward to seeing you in our masterclass as well. So without further ado, Martine, I can see they're waiting in the wings, in the virtual wings. So for those of you who don't yet know Martine, I'm going to introduce her via her bio, but then we're going to jump in straight into a chat. So Martine Harkin is the director and a facilitator at Leading Teams Australia. She joined Leading Teams in 2008, coming from a leadership role in the education sector. Martine has a Bachelor of Education and taught PE for 9 years. Leading Teams brought Martine on board as a partner because of her genuine, honest, and straightforward approach to team dynamics. She's now a part owner, lead, and facilitator. Martine delivers programs to a diverse range of clients across the corporate, education, not-for-profit, and sporting sectors. Because of this, she has much anecdotal evidence of the performance improvement program. Martine's unique approach creates a pathway for effective learning that allows participants to share knowledge and challenge thinking. A great strength of Martine's commitment to leadership development is the way she follows up on workshops through offering ongoing support and advice and through giving feedback, as well as seeking it for herself. Martine lives what she espouses, which is the glue that creates the authenticity participants respond to so positively. Martine established the Leading Teams Emerging Leaders program, which is now the High Performance Leadership program, an intensive 5-day course for individual professional development. Her passion for developing leaders stemmed from her experience of being promoted into a leadership role without formal leadership training. Instead, Martine learned how to be a leader on the job once given the title. Martine, welcome. Let's get rid of this slide. Now, there's so much I want to pull apart there just from your bio. And as I'm reading that, the fact that you got your first leadership role without any formal training, how many of us had that exact experience? I want to come back to that because I think, it's so important because yes, you learn on the job, but you kind of land in these roles with the pressure and the expectation and kind of go, I don't know what to do here. And that leads to all sorts of, bad behavior and all sorts of things. But before we get into that, it's so good to have you here. Tell us a bit in your words, because bios are one thing. I want to know more about you. What's your journey? What's led you to this point? Education, sport, leadership. Tell us about it.
Thanks, Alice. It's great to be here. I've been at Leading Teams for 12 years, nearly 13 years, and taught for about the same amount of time. I joined Leading Teams. It was kind of an accident, really, joining Leading Teams. I think it was manufactured at their end, but certainly the way that we usually recruit, and we've learnt it over the journey, are existing relationships that we have, which I think happens in a lot of businesses. And I remember when I was teaching, one of my old PE teachers, I used to keep in contact with. We had a good relationship and holidayed at the same space, and families were friends and all that stuff. And I remember seeing him in the paper. He was actually one of the reasons that I went down the track and became a teacher. But I remember seeing him in the paper. And it was just at the time when Leading Teams started working with Geelong Footy Club. And I saw him in the paper and I saw the team that was around him. And more importantly, I read the article and I thought, gee whiz, that sounds like a great place to work. And I'm really glad that he's landed where he has, that type of stuff. And I just thought I would reach out to him and try and catch up. And I don't really know why I did that, actually, but it's just funny how, sometimes things line up. And this did line up because I had a look at the website. I kind of made up his email address from stuff that I'd seen on the website. It was lucky that it worked. And it was actually at the time that internally Leading Teams were looking for a female facilitator and one with an education background. This photo that I saw in The Age was of half a dozen men, mostly sport, the elite sport background. And so I was the only female facilitator at Leading Teams for a long time. They'd worked a lot with female athletes. That's kind of how the business started. We used to train up elite athletes with the sporting teams that we were working with and go out to schools and prisons and those types of things to run different types of programs. We've certainly shifted a lot over that journey. I was mentioning to you before, a group of us females at Leading Teams got together yesterday and there's only 21 of us at Leading Teams and 6 of us are females. 2 of our 3 headquarters staff are female, and facilitators make up the rest. So that, I guess that's kind of the makeup at Leading Teams, and we can talk a bit more about that later on. So I remember first meeting some of the boys at Leading Teams, and then they invited me to join them. I wasn't really expecting it. But, having said that, I don't really know what I was expecting when I initially sent the email out anyway. So, and I just found not necessarily from looking at the website, but more from meeting with and talking with the guys that were at leading teams. I came away thinking, I have to find a way to work with that company. I really want to work with those people. And yeah, 13 years or nearly 13 years later, here I am. So in that time, not only have we gone through a lot of internal change at leading teams, we've probably never been bigger as a business than 23, 24. But, you know, whether it's different faces in and out, personally in the last 3 years, I've moved to Brisbane. And I moved, my fella lives here, so it's nothing fancy. You know, I moved for love, you know, one of those stories. So I made that transition. From a business point of view, it was easy enough in that it was a Mart, we'll do whatever we can to make this transition easy for you. So I didn't have to leave or find a different job or anything like that. What was the most challenging bit was moving here and not knowing anyone. So both personally in terms of a network, but also professionally not knowing anyone. So as much as I still love to travel to Melbourne and service my clients there and see family and all those types of things, obviously not this year, but the transition in terms of the social connection, sure, but also you know, starting a business from scratch, essentially from here, whilst I have an employee that started with me who's based in Melbourne. So while still training her up, and my responsibilities as one of the leaders in our business, and as one of the directors as well. So there's some added responsibilities, I guess, in terms of all of that. So it's been I don't know. I've got no doubt that, you know, through that time, I had not long after I started at leading teams, I got engaged. 12 months later, married. 12 months later, divorce or marriage ended. So I've been through that stuff as well early in my journey at leading teams, and I've got no doubt throughout that period, and it's still something that we do talk about internally. Just I often get feedback about the resilience, but I often get feedback about. It took me a while to talk about that. And I think, you know, in teams that I work with, that idea of sharing some of those major events in your life, you know, at the time when I was new to leading teams, I wouldn't have even thought to do that. I remember being in my previous position and going through some other hardships, I guess, as we all do. And I remember one day, you know, sitting, the setup of our office at the time was that I could sit at my desk, not see anyone because everyone was kind of behind me, and have a little cry to myself if there was something, you know, through a really hard time. And I didn't feel I could talk to anyone. I didn't think anyone would be interested. So I just kind of worked my way through it myself. But we know, and I know, that being in an environment where we do share that type of thing, even though it can be tricky, particularly the first time, I remember. And I remember there was the added, it was just I was the only female at the time. So sharing this kind of thing, a really big challenge with a bunch of blokes, some that I didn't really know all that well. I didn't know that they'd be into, you know, all that type of stuff. But there was just one day that a couple of them pulled me aside and said, Mart, what's going on? We know that things aren't right for you. And just kind of that overwhelming sense of relief and talking about it. You know, we still talk about that today. So, you know, why do I tell you that story? I think there's a bit in there around me. I have no doubt that my growth and being at leading teams for a significant part of my working life now has made me a better person. So, and going through some of those experiences and having the support around me have certainly helped shaped me as a person, as a leader, you know, all of those, as a business owner, all of those types of scenarios, both within the work context, but also out of it. So I owe a lot, and no, I contribute to, but I certainly owe a lot to my experience at leading teams.
Oh, there's so much in that. And thank you for sharing that, because they're such powerful stories, aren't they? And they're powerful because they show vulnerability. And I know you and I are going to go straight, I love that we're going to go straight into this, but, you know, emotion and vulnerability and transparency as a leader. I mean, it's kind of, and I don't know about you, and I want to hear your view as well. Like, I feel even in the last, and what has it been? You know, I said before, sort of, we started this live stream in March. We're now in November. And I've had this immense, I think you might be episode 90 or something like that. And you speak to these incredible people, and I think that the episodes and the ones where people so connect with are, unsurprisingly, these leaders that behind these big titles, director and business owner and CEO, it's these personal stories where you actually see the human behind the title. And I think kind of old school leadership was very much, no, you don't show any of that, and it's not safe to do that. And I feel like leadership and leadership expectations are really changing. I love that you talk about, and I don't love that you were crying in your cubicle, you know, I mean that, but it's powerful because I think a lot of us can really relate to those moments when you feel alone and that you can't really share because whether it's not professional or it's work, and that's kind of my private life or whatever. I often share, and probably for similar reasons that you shared that story. I remember when I got my first exec role, and which kind of, you know, I mean, it was in the mid of my career, but you know, I got that exec role, and I remember I went back. It was in Sydney. I was based in Melbourne, so I was in Sydney a lot. But you know, the glamour of travel, as you would know, well, when you could travel, but the glamour of travel being by yourself in a hotel room. And I would go back to that hotel room and cry. For I reckon the first 3 months, it felt like, because I was so overwhelmed and I didn't want to tell anyone, I didn't know what I was doing, all that sort of stuff. And I think they really shape us, those experiences. Do you so from that, I mean, we can go anywhere from that. Like I know that you talk a lot about the fact that great teams and leaders are the ones that recognize the emotion they're feeling. Or we could even go back a bit further and go, well, how did you start to feel safe in the culture at leading teams when it was all guys? But you can kind of take us in any direction you want to from that.
Yeah, I think, I think it's easy enough to kind of cover both because, you know, I reckon the terms around at the moment are vulnerability and psychological safety are the terms that are, you know, bandied around, and it's not to dismiss them at all.
Yeah.
We've actually been talking about that using different language for over 25 years, and it's also not to suggest that others don't. But I think, you know, having lived it, I think it's that environment of the idea of empowerment, firstly, as the end point. So where do you start from? Well, part of where you start from with that is building mutual trust and respect amongst the relationships with the people that you work with. So I knew really quickly when I joined leading teams, it wasn't really an interview. It was reasonably informal. That's the way we go about most things. But I remember part of it was just getting to know the people in the team. And so I think the work that we do with our clients, I had a great example just this morning around that building mutual trust and respect. And, you know, what we know about that is that leaders are the ones that have to take the first step sometimes, particularly if you're starting from a reasonably low base. And what's low, who knows? But, you know, when you know that there are some issues in that space. I had a great example this morning of I'm doing some work in hospitality with a restaurant owner. He owns a couple of restaurants. He's opening one today, actually. And he said to me, I caught up with him this morning. I had a review with him and his senior leaders last week. And I challenged him pretty strongly because there are a couple of key things, well, across his life, but more so quite recently, that he was keeping from his senior managers. And so I'd challenged him about it before, but I challenged him reasonably strongly about it and just the consequences, you know, what's stopping you, just asking lots of questions. And he actually told me this morning that after the session and after that conversation, when he knew, you know, when he sat with himself for a few minutes and he, you know, hand on heart, he said, I knew what you were saying was the right thing and I knew what I had to do. He filled me in this morning that, you know, straight after the conversation that we had, he walked around the corner and back into his restaurant. He pulled the senior managers together and he told them those couple of things that he hadn't divulged until then. And he started smiling as he was telling the story. And he said, and you know, and they received it really well. You know, he was worried about would they tell people, you know, all those types of things, what would the impact be? And there's some legitimate ramifications if people knew based on the actual situations themselves. But he said, you know, that the great thing was that the following day, one of these senior managers came to him and said, and actually shared something with him that he hadn't previously shared before. So it's kind of that idea for us. And what psychological safety means for us is that idea that it is safe enough, that if we build strong enough professional relationships built on mutual trust and respect, then it is safe enough to be able to share not only the work challenges that we had, perhaps, and that might be your situation as a new exec, but also those personal, some of those personal events, when you spend so much time at work, and as you say, that old school leadership of leave those things at the door as you walk in, the lines are pretty blurry around that these days. And for us, there's no boundaries. We know that teams do have boundaries, because we also know that the risks of not having boundaries is that you go through each other's really hard times. So when we've had marriage breakup, or kids being unwell, or all of those awful things that happen in people's lives, when your relationships are genuinely strong, you do go through those downs. You also go through the ups. But what it does mean from a professional point of view too, where the benefits are there, is that people feel safe enough to share their ideas as they're sitting around the leadership team table, and they don't walk away thinking, oh, I kind of had an idea, but I don't want to present it because of what people might say, or I might get shot down. So in terms of innovation, creativity, accountability, people just are able to address issues quicker, and they're also able to bring up different ideas, which does create that innovation, creativity. And I think that the idea of gender that fits in there, and we could add any type of criteria, I guess, because there are so many, let's face it, in terms of diversity, we just don't have a caveat. So for us, it doesn't matter. And we know that men, to follow this one, the gender one, because it's real, we know that there are differences in men and women. There's no doubt about that. So it's not to dismiss that the reality and the research and the evidence that there are different, but we would prefer to go down the track of establishing a genuine culture of inclusion, because then it embraces diversity within that existing group. But of course, there is the challenge too, and we face it internally, of that genuine diversity from if we look at your team, go to the Leading Teams website, we are mainly middle-aged, white, male. The stuff that you don't necessarily see from the photos, sporting background too, kind of gets added into that for us. So we've got those challenges, those real challenges too.
So how do you, it's so interesting to reflect on that. So what's your approach for your own business in obviously, one, awareness, but addressing some of those diversity challenges?
I guess internally where we start from is that the relationship stuff is really important for us. We also have a very clear set of behaviours, a trademark we call it, and this is the work that we do with teams. So having a very clear set of behaviours that we all have some ownership over. There's the expectation that we model those behaviours, we reward them, that we challenge them. So that's how our leaders, we can talk about this later, how our leaders get voted in is mainly around that. So that's from a dynamics point of view. Certainly from a mechanics, a process point of view, quite often as a leadership team, as a board, we will have that conversation about diversity and evening up the gender balance in our team. And for us, we have a conversation about it, and we throw around some different ideas, and we look for opportunities to find great women or different backgrounds to be able to join our business based on our growth strategy. So with any team, in terms of when we look at teams and help them with the idea of performance improvement, we look at it from both of those angles. We certainly sit very much in the dynamics space, so those behaviours, relationships, attitudes, conversations, those types of things. But we also know, and equally important, are the processes, mechanics that sit behind it. So it's a constant challenge for us, Alex, too, certainly from a mechanics point of view.
And I love that you say that, because that's the reality of we're in business and life with other humans, and it's constantly fluid. And I think it's such an important point that you pull out there, that it's both. You've got to have, because it won't surprise you, and you and I chatted about this behind the scenes, you see so much money being spent on D&I programs, and generally it's the right intent, it's from the top, there's a policy, there's a committee, there's a head of D&I, there's and you've got to have those component parts. But I don't know about you, the bit that seems to be missing, because then, we've all seen, the stats and the research ad nauseum that it's not working. It's not working fast enough. And I'm so curious about, you dig into why, if all that money's being spent and all the right stuff's being done, and yet still here we are, we're not moving the dial, and you're right, it's not just through a gender lens, it's through, and I love that it's a culture of inclusion that lends itself to diversity. I think that's a really great frame. But is it because there's only the mechanics and they're not bringing to life the dynamic actions and behaviours and the personal connections? And I mean, is that what you think is kind of the imbalance here, or?
I think so. And again, I think it's the genuine intent, because if the genuine intent, then we'd all go down the track of, related to this particular topic, whether it's quotas or, if the genuine intent is just to tick a box, then you'll find a way to tick the box.
Yeah.
But whether it's this gender issue or any diversity issue, or whether it's just issues and challenges that you're having in your team, if you're not willing as leaders to ask the genuine question and get to the root cause of the issue, then you can apply and tick as many boxes as you like. But our brains are pretty smart, so they're going to keep dragging us back to what the root issue really is, and it'll keep there'll be ways that it will keep being exposed.
Yeah.
And I think this year has stripped everyone back, as much as we ever have before in terms of exposure. So, if we're talking about different work versus home environments, or, that idea, as we were talking about before, of leaving your personal life at home, I'm under no illusion that businesses still work that way, but it's pretty bloody hard to keep it that way when you're running your business from home and you've got no choice about that. So I think unless teams are willing to and have the appetite to address causes of issues and challenges, and, we can open it right up here, then they'll keep finding a way to resurface. So I think it's, when I'm talking to teams, and I said it to a group last week, we were kind of at the point of, are we continuing to do our work together or are we not? And I said to them, guys, all I'm looking for is an appetite for you to address some of the issues in your culture, because what I'd seen so far is that they were trying to find ways around it, or being a bit gentle. And it doesn't have to, if you've got the appetite, great. We start from where your starting point is. If we've got to go right back and create the safety in your environment, then that's what we do. It's not have you got the appetite? Yes, right, whack, we're coming in, we're wiping everyone out. That's certainly not what it's about. Because we want to help teams to create the environment that's sustainable, and that's ourselves included. So it's sustainable, it's safe all the time, there's high level of accountability, there's high level of expectation, but geez, there's a high level of care here. So wherever our starting point is okay, but we've got to have the appetite to go there.
Yeah, and I love, yes, let's open it right up, because you're right, it gets found out, doesn't it? And I don't know about you, but I mean, this year has just been so, interesting is one word, but I love that you say that, it's stripped everyone down. I've really felt that. I think, whether it's from actually seeing, the life that we have behind the scenes or the facade and dealing with kids and everything else. But I don't know, I feel like so many leaders and teams have been in this reflection moment. And I think it's been super interesting that some of the dysfunction that maybe has kind of bubbled away, that hasn't been that obvious, I feel like that's also been really exposed in the spotlight of, great, well, so the team's not functional now or over Zoom. Well, it's not because it's Zoom. It's kind of, the cracks were there before, and it's like now there's more stuff that's coming, whether it's communication or genuine empathy or whatever it might be. Do you agree? I mean, you don't have to. Do you think that it's really that what we've been forced into this year has kind of exposed some of the cracks that were already there around all these things?
I think so, Alex. And what you've done, though, and we can't assume that everyone does it, what some teams that I work with desperately want to do is to put this year in a box and to put all of that, poor behaviour that might have come out, and actually use the excuse of, oh, well, that's just Zoom, so that's okay. So let's put all that behaviour in a box, tie it, and throw it as far away as possible, because we never want to be in this situation again, which of course is understandable. But let's actually use it. This is what I mean about the appetite.
Yeah.
I said it to a team not that long ago, and I don't work with them anymore because I challenged them around. We had a big list of behaviours on the board. I just asked them the question, what have we really learnt about our team? We had a big list of behaviours on the board. 70% of them were super positive, and they'd learned a lot, and that, like everyone else, being super challenged and all that type of thing. But when I started to challenge them a bit around what can we take from, these 5 or 6 behaviours, and they started to make some excuses. And when I put the idea of, hey, we've got a choice here to either put these in a box and throw them away, or let's actually delve into these a little bit more, I can see them start to back away, and actually quite literally, and all eyes went to the CEO because they didn't know what to say. So I think the thing about it, though, is for people that are perhaps listening, is that if you feel that that's happened over the last 6 months, I think the good part about all of this is that you can start with this stuff now, because as we've spoken about, the behaviour is not going to go away. Hopefully we get a chance to go back into the workplace and all of those types of things. If you're hearing language around your teams of, oh, I'm not sure we want to go back into the workplace, there's alarm bells going off in there for me, and just asking the question about, well, why, and tell us more about that. No judgment there, but just tell us more about that. But I think, regardless of where you've been and your experience with your own culture or your own decision making as you're sitting and doing that reflection, I think the most important bit of any reflection that you do, and the work that we do with teams is ongoing. So there's ongoing reflection and review that happens regularly. If you don't do anything and change anything off the back of that reflection or review, then we can keep being in the cycle, but there's kind of not much point, and not much is going to shift and change.
More damaging, don't you reckon, as well? When you get everyone to kind of do the review, and then there's that black trough where then nothing ever happens and it never sees. I reckon that almost takes you even further back.
I think so. Yeah, agree. And I think so that the key out of all this, though, is that all is not lost. Yeah. There's no reason that you can't get together. You can't get together tomorrow and let's do let's bring this stuff back and let's work on a way to shift and change it. So I like that about this type of work, because you can always redeem yourself. Depending on what's happened and how you've treated your people or how you've been treated, but there's some work that can be started.
Which kind of, unsurprisingly, I think it brings us kind of back, the theme there of, well, as a leader, do you have, it's self-awareness, right? Like, do you have and it's self-awareness and courage and like all the things we're talking about, recognizing the emotion that you feel as a leader, because I think that's probably, for you as well as, what I've observed, it's really brought us to the fore, I think, during this time for all manner of reasons, readjustments and some introspection and reflection, and and you're right, some go, well, let's pretend this never happened and just go back to normal. So many other people I speak to I think are kind of, they're in that uncomfortable zone, leaders or team members or anything in between, of, oh, I don't know that I want to go back to how it was, but I kind of don't know what the future, so there's a bit of fear there as well. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But I love that theme that you're talking about is, it's never too late. You can literally go, you know what, we've been under pressure, we all do it. Even it's funny with our team at Few, we're a forming team, we're a relatively new team, some of us haven't even met in person, it's all virtual, so you've got all those pressures of growing businesses where I think, you've got to kind of go, wow, okay, I probably didn't handle that well, or I was under stress, or I'm exhausted, all those things. I think if you can have those conversations with your team, but you've got to kind of acknowledge that and go, okay, well then how do we get better? And I think that's kind of the important bit for me. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question there around how do we get better?
Yeah.
But you're right. What that also starts with, though, is an individual leader saying, righto, how can I get better?
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of that first step of wanting to do that, and that it being okay that you don't know. And again, we can throw that, well, none of us have been through this before, of course, but, how many times as a leader do you go into a different scenario and think, I don't really know what to do here? So I think it's the importance of knowing that yourself, or at least stopping and asking that question of yourself, self-awareness. But if you find that you're still struggling, and struggling is in not sure what to do, or just, if if you feel like you're doing this reflection, but what you're getting from your team, or based on what you might change or whatever, if that's still not quite right, again, I reckon it's the importance of the strong professional relationship for me, and having a team of people around you that you can go to someone and say, hey, how am I going? Like,
Yeah.
I would love you to help me here. Can you give me, it's the things that we ask teams, 3 words to describe me, and give me an area for improvement that you think would help me. And then when you ask that question and you've got strong enough relationships, to be able to ask the question, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't, ask it anyway, because by asking the question, as the receiver, having someone ask them that question, it starts to give permission and open the doors for that type of conversation.
Absolutely.
So I think, again, it's that for me, it's that idea of that safety and the trust and respect in relationships within teams, to be able to have that conversation, because we shouldn't have to do it all on our own.
And isn't it liberating when, as a leader, you actually realise that you don't need to have all the answers, which I reckon kind of goes back to, and sorry, that's actually a really important point, so I don't want to gloss over that. Yes, 1,000%, because I think it is liberating, and actually going, you know what, I don't know, and actually going, okay, this might hurt or not be great fit, but I'm going to, that actually is liberating, because of all the reasons that you're saying, it's building relationship and trust, but that's where you get this personal growth from. So it's so important. I want to go back a bit to something that I read in your bio about, literally, you reflect on your first leadership role. There's no little black book of leadership. And this is so often the case, right? And I mean, you work with so many organisations of all shapes and sizes. So often, despite best intentions, and they could be great people, but you get the promotion, everyone's like, we see something in you, off you go, and you suddenly have this big role and the big title and everyone looking at you. And especially for your first leadership role when you're leading other human beings, I mean, this is a massive, massive transition from just kind of worrying about your own stuff. How can we as leaders help new leaders transition in a better way that doesn't just chuck them in there and kind of hope for the best? Because I think that's where a lot of those behaviours, if I can't ask questions because I'll look like an idiot and I'm expected to know this already, so I'm not going to ask, and gosh, I've got to know everything because they've just put me in here and I don't want to let anyone down, getting a big insight into, my own mental, processes from my career. But that's real, right? Because that's the pressure that then comes on you. How can we do better in especially for new leaders coming up, really helping them transition and have the confidence of how to step into that role?
Yeah, it's one that I see all the time, and I remember in my previous environment, and I loved what I did. So it's not that it was a toxic workplace; it was a great workplace. The way that it worked, though, is that people were promoted based on their tenure. Based on, for me, it was, well, I was an assistant for a little while, so it was the next step. It's that. So it's tenure, it's the pathway. It's and it's largely, from my experience now, since having left the education industry, it's largely also competence. So the ability to do your job. So you do the job the best. So, we want to give you a promotion, but there's nothing in there, as you say, there's nothing in there about, well, not only now do I can't really do the job the best anymore because I've got all these people, but I still do the job the best and they don't, but I lead them now. So there's that. I think for us, it's that bigger, broader question around, firstly, how you pick, so how you select those leaders. And also too, when it comes to the selection or recruitment or whatever it is, again, having a really clear culture, and for us, it's that trademark, that clear set of 4 or 5 behaviours, not only that you look for, and if you're rewarding them along the way, then they stand out. And they might actually stand out from different areas of the business that you think, wow, this guy's been around for 6 months, or she's only been here for this amount of time, and wow, look at that in terms of living and breathing our culture and our behaviour. So it gives everyone, it evens out that tenure, it evens out that the hierarchy around competence, by having those clear expectations of behaviour. And it also means too that when you do get the right people in, or you do promote the right people, and we've got some ways that we do that. I've mentioned to you that we choose our own leaders, so it's a vote. We vote our leaders in, which we can talk about. Which we can talk about. But it's also what happens when they're in, or what happens to the new people in teams. And again, when you've got that clear culture, those clear set of behaviours, it makes it easier for what that induction is, because those behaviours will actually show you the way. And look, whether you put processes alongside around buddies or mentors or whatever that might be, that's an aside and really important. But if you've got that foundation, or someone again recently described it as that North Star, and if you don't waver from those behaviours, it makes that whole process of, well, it's the journey of someone's walking into your business to perhaps being a leader to their exiting.
Love that you've gone here, and we're already going to run out of time. I feel like, well, I mean, they're big topics, right? And I mean, you spend this is kind of your life's work in your business as well. But just what you said there as well, I think one of the traps for young players, gosh, how old do I sound now? But, it's, and you learn through wisdom and experience, but that recruitment process. And I remember one of my mentors years and years, and it's always stuck with me. He said, Alex, always be recruiting. And at the time, I'm like, I don't know what you mean by that. And of course, what he meant was that if you wait until the last minute when someone critical goes and you haven't, and you've got keep, all these other things, whatever, and you're suddenly up against the wall to fill a position, what you're talking about there, about that North Star and about behaviours and about not wavering about the culture and what you want to see, that's when you can make some knee-jerk decisions, because you just got to find the body, right? And as we've probably all been there, I forget what the saying is, but you can make that decision fast, and then it can turn bad really fast. And I think for me, that always be recruiting has always stuck with me, because I think, to your exact point, if you're always talking to talent, if you're always imagining that if I had a role tomorrow, who are the people, and kind of, I guess, how you probably came into leading teams, like you were sharing, who are the people in my orbit? Who do I know that would be a great fit? Who's a great cultural fit, so that when there's an opportunity, you're not compromising on your North Star? Tell us a bit about voting in your leaders, because I am really fascinated by this. I think it's such a great idea. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's something that we do internally. It's something that we certainly started. We do a fair bit of work in sport, and for those that are tuning in from Melbourne, you're more chance of hearing about leading teams because of our connection with the AFL particularly. And so we do it with our sporting teams, but we also do it with our corporate teams too. And it's simply, look, it depends on the purpose of your leadership team. For us at Leading Teams, our purpose is essentially to run the business. So we went through a period of having a CEO a couple of times. But I remember the day our CEO, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, actually came to us as a team, as a staff, and said, guys, you don't need a CEO anymore. You don't need me anymore. And so we had that conversation. How we do it now, and the purpose of our leadership team, as I mentioned, is to run the business. So there is a part of selecting our leaders that there is a competence element there. But largely, and it's the question that we ask our group, who do you trust most to run our business? It's from a competence point of view, but it's also from a character point of view. So that's the living and breathing our trademark, our behaviours, particularly under pressure. And we ask our team to vote us in. This year it was, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's, as open as we could. We did it on Zoom this year, so it's as open as we could.
Yeah.
I read out my 4, 3, 2, 1. There's names on a list, and we have the conversation about who gets in, who misses out. And I don't want to gloss over the process, because there's some really great conversations that fall out of that, and it's not something that I would suggest everyone just go away and do, but it's also something I wouldn't suggest that you think, oh my God, we would never be in a place to be able to do that, because a group that I am working with, and it is a corporate group, when I started with them, they'd never really had a leadership team before. They came from a really autocratic style of leader, and when they brought me in, they kind of just brought in 11 or 12 people around the business together. And when I asked them on that very first day, what are you here for? And they didn't actually know why they were here. So we went from that to, and one of the guys was sharing it recently, we went from that scenario to nearly 12 months ago, that group voting in a senior leadership team. And the way they did it was purely based on, it was around influence, who has the most influence, but in light of having the most influence, who lives our behaviours, who lives and drives our values the best across the business out of this group of 11 or 12. And we had a vote there. One of the senior directors missed out. And so that was a conversation. There was some that wanted to opt out. There was some that thought, but it really tells a great story, and the team's in really good shape.
Yeah, but which kind of goes to your point, which we've talked about the whole way. It's open and transparent conversations, digging in. What's the real intention here? If it's genuine. I just as you're talking about, even and obviously for a lot of our community, a lot of you do work in big corporate. So it might not be, as Martine says, that you get to the point where you've got, maybe it is. I mean, I love all this sort of, really let's change the hierarchy and the old way of doing things. But I just think even that reflection of, if we were voted in as leaders, would I be voted in? Isn't that a great personal reflection point? And just to be clear as well for everyone listening, so when you're talking about trademarks, is that, around kind of that social contract philosophy where you all, as a trademark, you all agree and come up with the behaviours and the values that you're all saying together and publicly, this is what we're signing up to, rather than remember the old posters on the wall about our values that never saw the light of day anywhere else?
So it's the poster on the wall, all of that type of stuff. We have the conversation with the team, and we, depending on the size of the organisation, we've obviously got different ways of doing that. But the bigger the weight of numbers that you've got having, an interest and invested in those behaviours, then the weight of numbers shifts, which means that your culture will shift. So it comes from questions like, how would our team be described? What are those behaviours that we currently accept that are stopping us from being our absolute best? And the questions aren't earth-shattering, but sometimes we just don't go there in terms of answering them genuinely, or answering them genuinely with the right people. We might go away and talk about it with someone when we're going for a coffee, or we'll go home and we'll talk about it with people at home. So it's actually having those conversations. It's that appetite to have those conversations, dig a little bit. We know that every team that we work with doesn't start from a toxic, really, really low base. I had a conversation with someone recently, and as I was sitting there talking to him, I'm like, mate, I'm not sure that you need me. But he really, all he wanted was having a shared ownership of what it means to be a part of their organisation, and he wanted some external help to do it. So,
and isn't it such a great sign of a progressive leader, though? Like, you just share that.
Absolutely.
It's people who you go, well, actually, I'm already here, but I know we can be better. I'm always curious and always learning. Hey, I told you this would go fast. I don't know where the last 47 minutes went. But thank you so much. I feel like we could just literally keep digging in and talking, because this is, and out of everything you've shared, Martine, I mean, there's so much, but I think for everyone listening as well, it's never too late. And I think just this very unique set of circumstances where we have found ourselves and still find ourselves transitioning back to work or mixed teams. I know one of our partners the CEO shared with me a couple of weeks ago that, going back, not all the offices, you've got the option, but you don't, they've made the call, you don't have to go back into the office. And some middle managers are struggling with that. So I think now more than ever, this is the great time to talk to this. So, and talking about real life, you can probably hear my dog shaking in the background.
You can see the tail.
Yeah, you can see the tail. There you go. So Martine, just quickly, if people want to work with you, know more about how they work with you as a team, as a leader, how can they do that?
Oh, look, I think the best thing is just to go to our website. That's probably the best way. There's some contact details there. That'd be the best way. And, you can either find your way to me specifically, or we've got a team based around the country. So more than happy, because we've touched on so much stuff, definitely more than happy, even if it's just to continue the conversation. But I think you're right, the idea of it's not too late. And, whether you feel like you're not in a position to be making some of these decisions, the very question that you posed, Alex, is what can I learn from this? How can I be a better leader? Would I be voted in? They're all great questions. So it's kind of that idea that no one gets left off the hook in this scenario. So you can all walk away with something, which I think is a terrific opportunity for everyone.
So good, so powerful. Thank you so much for your time. It's been
Pleasure.
awesome chatting. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and all of you out there, I can't see your faces, but thank you for tuning in as well and being part of this. Martine, it's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, don't miss tomorrow at 12 o'clock for our Thursday diversity series. That's Tuesday. Our digital transformation series on Thursdays with me and Mick Philippo. I'll see you all there. Have an awesome day. See you tomorrow. And thanks, Martine.
Pleasure. Thank you. It's great.